invite you to a very short video clips, which will provide us a background for the discussion that will come forth. Please.
Hong Kong is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China. As a special administrative region directly under the Central People's Government, Hong Kong enjoys a high degree of autonomy under one country, two systems. Over the past year, the Hong Kong community has been traumatized. Violence by rioters has escalated, with illegal firearms and explosives posing a terrorist threat. Groups and individuals advocating Hong Kong independence and colluding with foreign forces to interfere with Hong Kong's affairs have seriously undermined national interest and security. Hong Kong has become a gaping hole in national security, and our city's prosperity and stability are at risk. Sadly, there is now little hope of the Hong Kong SAR enacting local laws to safeguard national security. Against this background, the central authorities have no option but to exercise their constitutional power to establish and improve the legal system and enforcement mechanisms for the Hong Kong SAR to safeguard national security. This is a decision not taken lightly. The national security legislation will only target an extremely small minority of illegal and criminal acts and activities, while the life and property, basic rights and freedoms of the overwhelming majority of citizens will be protected. Above all, it will restore stability in Hong Kong. I appeal for your full understanding and staunch support for putting in place national security legislation in Hong Kong.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite, with great honor, His Excellency Ambassador Chen Xu, permanent representative of the People's Republic of China to UN office at Geneva and other international organizations in Switzerland to address the conference. Please, Ambassador.
Distinguished guests, friends, welcome to this virtual conference. The panelists today come from the Central Government of China, the Government of Hong Kong SAR, the Legislative Council, and the civil society. From different perspectives, they will share with us their insights into the national security law for Hong Kong and the significance of the law in protecting human rights. They will present to you Hong Kong as it is. National security legislation is a sacred and inviolable right of a state. China has established and improved the legal system and enforcement mechanism of safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong SAR at national level, and maintained the constitutional order of the Hong Kong SAR established by the Constitution of China and the Basic Law of Hong Kong, which fully conforms to the provisions of the Constitution and the Basic Law. These can help to fill up the gaping holes in safeguarding national security in Hong Kong SAR, responded to the urgent needs of people in Hong Kong for safeguarding national security. It helps to ensure that one country, two systems goes steady and that Hong Kong continues to enjoy prosperity and stability. For this reason, the law has won staunch support of people from across the country, including people from all walks of life in Hong Kong. The National Security Law for Hong Kong explicitly stipulates that human rights in Hong Kong shall be protected and respected. The rights and freedoms enjoyed by Hong Kong residents in accordance with the Basic Law and the relevant provisions of the ICCPR and the ICESCR as applied to Hong Kong will not be prejudiced. Rather, they can be better exercised in a safer environment. The accusation that the national security law violates human rights is totally untenable. China's enactment of the National Security Law for Hong Kong has won the support of the overwhelming majority members of the international community in June this year. Representatives from over 70 countries stressed at the Human Rights Council that the Hong Kong SAR is part of China, and that they supported the adoption of the Hong Kong National Security Law and the implementation of one country, two systems in Hong Kong. However, a small number of countries, including the US, the UK, and Canada, wantonly interfered in the affairs of Hong Kong out of political motives, attempting to stir up chaos and turmoil in Hong Kong and undermine China's sovereignty and territorial integrity by leveraging Hong Kong-related issues. Their attempts will go nowhere. Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China. Hong Kong affairs fall within China's internal affairs. The Chinese government is resolved to implement the principle of one country, two systems, safeguard national sovereignty, security, and development interests. China is resolutely opposed to attempts by any person or force to brew instability, secession, and turmoil in China, and to the interference in China's internal affairs by any country using Hong Kong-related issues. We are confident that with the escort of the national security law, one country, two systems will continue to show its vigor, and for Hong Kong, a brighter future awaits ahead. I wish today's meeting a complete success. Thank you all.
I thank Ambassador Chen for his address, which provided a keynote for discussion today.
今天讨论的主旨致辞。接下来，我请我们的主讲嘉宾开始讨论。首先，我邀请
Xi Junjian. Mr. Xi is a Deputy Director General of the Hong Kong Law Department of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office of the State Council, which is the department directly under the central government in charge of Hong Kong and Macau affairs. Mr. Xi, please.
Some have even been imposed so-called sanctions against China and its Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. We strongly condemn and oppose such blatant interference in China's internal affairs.
作为一名在中国中央政府港澳工作部门 安全的机构设置、力量配备、执法权力配置等方面存在明显缺失和短板，在国家安全方面可以说一直处于不设防状态。这种状况导致香港特别行政区危害国家安全的各类活动变本加厉，愈演愈烈。2019年发生的修例风波期间，香港内外敌对势力肆无忌惮进行港独、黑暴等活动，冲击中央驻港机构和特别行政区政权机构，煽动分裂国家、颠覆国家政权，组织实施恐怖活动，勾结外部势力干预香港特别行政区事务， 严重破坏香港社会秩序和法治秩序，严重威胁国家安全，特别是香港特别行政区政权安全。香港在维护国家安全方面面临巨大风险。在香港特别行政区已不具备条件自行立法的情况下，中国政府从中央层面制定香港国安法，建立健全香港特别行政区维护国家安全的法律制度和执行机制，是香港刑事发展的必然要求和保障香港长治久安的治本之策，也是包括香港同胞在内的14亿中国人民发自肺腑的呼声，势在必行，刻不容缓。第二，制定香港国安法是作为中国最高国家权力机关的全国人大及其常委会的限制权利和责任，合理合法。国家安全关乎一个国家的生存和发展，关乎国家核心利益。国家安全事务属于中央事权，世界各国都有维护国家安全的立法。香港基本法第23条规定，香港特别行政区应自行立法禁止7种危害国家安全的行为，是在一国两制下，基于对香港特别行政区的高度信任和对香港法律制度的充分尊重做出的特殊安排。但香港回归23年来，这一限制责任却迟迟未能完成。修例风波之后，相当长时间内更成了不可完成的任务。根据中国宪法，全国人大作为最高国家权力机关，负责创设香港特别行政区，并通过法律规定其制度。全国人大通过
establishment of any special administrative region in China and for adoption of the laws defining institutions of the region. It has been the case for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The NPC adopted a decision authorizing the Standing Committee to enact a Hong Kong national security law with a view to establish and improving the region's legal system and enforcement mechanism in this regard. It aims to supplement and improve, on the basis of relevant provisions of the Basic Law, Hong Kong institutional framework for safeguarding national security. The enactment of the National Security Law is compatible with Article 23 of the Basic Law and does not replace or neglect Hong Kong's constitutional duty under Article 23 to enact national security legislation. The enactment is in full compliance with the Constitution and the Basic Law. Its legality is without question. Third, the Hong Kong's national security law embodies the principles of respect and protection of human rights and is in complete conformity with international human rights covenants and conventions. First, the fundamental purpose of the law is to safeguard national security, ensure steady and sustained progress in the implementation of the policy of one country, two systems. As such, the law will provide stronger safeguards for the legitimate rights, interests, and freedoms of Hong Kong residents. Secondly, the Hong Kong national security law keeps a proper balance between safeguarding national security and protecting human rights. It is in line with the provision and spirit of international human rights treaties that restrictions may be imposed on rights and freedoms for national security reasons in accordance with the law. The Hong Kong National Security Law targets criminal acts that endanger the national security. It provides clear definition for the 4 types of offenses that it covers. Such acts and offenses have nothing to do with law-abiding Hong Kong residents, who are the overwhelming majority of Hong Kong. The law will not affect the right and freedom, including the freedom of speech, press, publication, association, of assembly, and procession, which residents of the region enjoy under the Basic Law and the provisions of relevant international human rights covenants as applied to Hong Kong. The law will serve to provide a peaceful, safe environment that allows Hong Kong residents to better exercise their rights and freedoms. Furthermore, for those who are suspected or accused of committing a national security offense, their rights in judicial proceedings are fully guaranteed. The Hong Kong National Security Law reflects the principles of no penalty without a law, the presumption of innocence, the protection of rights in judicial proceedings, no double jeopardy, and also no retroactivity, as well as procedural protection that suspects or accused enjoy under relevant laws and regulations. In one word, Hong Kong National Security Law conforms with the provisions of relevant international human rights covenants, and any claim that the law restrictions that violates human rights is nothing but groundless accusations and malicious smear. In the past 2 months, we can see that activities it is very clear that the law is having a positive impact on the society. Those include with foreign elements has dropped significantly. Laws and order and the rule of law are back on track. Residents feel more safe and business environment is improving. Law enforcement and judicial authorities of Hong Kong strictly follow relevant legal procedures in dealing with cases of national security law violations. Only a very small handful of individuals are involved in such case. So far, there's only 1 individual are prosecuted and only around 20 arrested for suspected violations of the law. With the implementation of the national security law in Hong Kong, the ship of one country, 2 systems will sail far and steady, and Hong Kong will embrace an even better future. Thank you very much.
May I caution you that we provide the simultaneous interpretation.
再次提醒大家，我们为大家提供了同声传译。如果您需要中文，那么您就可以选择中文频道来听同声传译。接下来，我要邀请汤家华先生来与我们分享他对于香港国安法的观点。刚才我们介绍了这项立法的必要性和紧迫性，并且它也完全符合中国的宪法以及国际人权相关公约的规定。同样呢，它也适用于今天的香港。好，那汤家华先生呢，他是行政会议非官守议员，他现在呢也是在香港的一个智库的召集人。
He's also a member of the Economic and Employment Council. He served as a deputy judge of the High Court of Hong Kong, 1992 through 2002. Now the Honorable Tong, please.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Can I start by saying that if truth be told, the magnitude of negative reaction of most Western countries, led by the United States, to the Hong Kong national security law took everyone by surprise. A surprise because it is difficult to see any real rational or legal basis behind such reaction. There are, broadly speaking, 2 major accusations, neither of which can withstand scrutiny. First, that somehow the national security law violates the Joint Declaration. Secondly, that the freedoms of Hong Kong people have thereby been curtailed. Well, let's look at each of these 2 accusations. I don't wish to call the first accusation relating to the Sino-British Joint Declaration as being absurd, but frankly, there is no better word for it. The Joint Declaration never mentioned anything about national security, let alone China, by regaining sovereignty over Hong Kong, has somehow thereby given up its unarguable sovereign right to safeguard itself on matters of national safety. Quite the contrary. Clause 1 of the basic policies of the People's Republic of China regarding Hong Kong, on which the Joint Declaration was based, made it abundantly clear that the very foundation of regaining sovereignty over Hong Kong was in order to uphold national unity and territorial integrity of China. It is therefore absurd to even suggest that a condition of regaining sovereignty over Hong Kong was to forego China's right to safeguard its own national safety. Britain didn't ask, and it would be absurd to ask, and China would never agree. Clause 2 of the basic policy stipulated that the Hong Kong SAR government would come directly under the authority of the central government and enjoy a high degree of autonomy. That means Hong Kong would enjoy a high degree of autonomy, but only does so as directly under the central government. It therefore cannot mean that Hong Kong could somehow thereby usurp or displace the central government's power to legislate in relation to matters of national security. This is not surprising, as even in Western countries, matters of national security is the responsibility of the central or federal government rather than that of the provincial or state government, let alone a city government. In any event, the Joint Declaration did not mention anything about whose responsibility it was to legislate on matters of national security. So what violation are we talking about? Now, the second point about perceived erosion of human rights or freedoms of people of Hong Kong is equally difficult to understand. Yes, Clause 5 of the basic policies did mention about the freedoms of the people of Hong Kong would be ensured by law. In Part 13 of Annex 1 of the same document, China elaborated its basic policies. And there it was explained that its SAR government, and I quote, shall maintain the rights and freedoms as provided for by the laws previously enforced in Hong Kong. Now note the words previously enforced in Hong Kong. Such rights and freedoms did not include and could not be understood to be capable of overriding the nation's right to protect national security. This is because before the resumption of sovereignty by China, the British colonial government had already enacted various national security laws in Hong Kong, protecting the UK government, including one legislation called the Crimes Ordinance, which directly impacted on the freedoms and rights of Hong Kong people in relation to crimes like treason, sedition, and the like. In other words, the rights and freedoms of the people of Hong Kong have always been subjected to national security limitations. The Joint Declaration accepted this from day one. So why is Britain now reneging from this understanding? Clearly, the rights and freedoms of the people of Hong Kong have not diminished by reason of the national security law. I think in any event, this whole concept about freedoms and national security being in conflict with one another, and they cannot coexist, is archaic as well as misconceived. In this respect, I think Americans should know better than anyone because it is their past president, President Roosevelt, who said, and I quote, "Order without liberty and liberty without order are equally destructive. Where is order if there is no national safety?" The modern concept of freedom is not without limitation. One only needs to look at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, to understand the internationally well-accepted principle that freedom is never without limits. Ask any government, and they will tell you the same. They only say it differently when it comes to China. For that is exactly what the Western world is saying to China, that you cannot infringe on people's freedoms even if such freedoms threaten the safety of the nation. Now, if that is not double standard, I don't know what is. If we properly understand the concept of freedom, we will also understand that Clause 1 of the basic policies emphasizing on the importance of national unity and territorial integrity is never in conflict with Clause 5, which underlines the importance of Hong Kong people's freedoms and rights under the one country, two systems. In fact, safety of the nation on the one hand, and freedoms and rights of the individual on the other, are but two sides of the same coin. We need to strike a proper balance. And that is exactly what the Hong Kong National Security Law is trying to do. If you look at the full text of the law, you will see that Article 4 of the National Security Law reiterates the applicability of the two well-known international human rights conventions, which are enshrined in the Basic Law, the ICCPR and the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Article 5 of the law also listed out the common rule of law principles safeguarding the rights of the accused. What is more, unlike the archaic treason laws of the US and the UK, which are still in force today, the primary offenses under national security law are well defined and in line with modern day requirements of such offenses. For example, apart from secession, the rest of the offenses all require the presence of either violence, use of force, or unlawful means. In the case of secession, what is required is the organization, planning, commission, or participation of acts which will lead to the separation of Hong Kong from the rest of China, or altering the legal status of Hong Kong by unlawful means, or the surrendering of Hong Kong to a foreign country. Now, let's face it, there's nothing unusual or vague about these offenses, nor are they unreasonable infringements on the freedoms of people of Hong Kong. But I think the most important safeguard is that Article 8 stipulates that the national security law will be enforced by law enforcement agencies and our fully independent judiciary of Hong Kong. And Article 40 also provides that the SAR government shall have jurisdiction over offenses under the national security law, save in 3 very clearly defined situations under Article 55 of the law. Now, these 3 situations are first, where due to the involvement of a foreign country or external elements, which we understand to mean Taiwan, a case is too complex and difficult for Hong Kong to handle. Given the fact that both the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law accepts that matters of foreign relations and national defense are outside the autonomy of Hong Kong, we think that such provision is clearly reasonable. The second situation is where a serious situation occurs which renders the SAR government unable to effectively enforce the national security law. And the third is where a major and imminent threat to national security has occurred. It is important to note that of the 3 situations, the first is a situation which involves issues in a specific case which are outside the autonomy of Hong Kong, while the other 2 relate to general state of affairs prevailing in either Hong Kong or the rest of China. These are all specific emergency situations and most unlikely to happen, which by its very nature, most unlikely to affect ordinary prosecutions under the national security law. There is therefore no basis whatsoever to suggest that the central government will step in on basis unknown to the law and at any time when they like. Proof of the pudding is in the eating. Since the passing of the national security law, life has gradually returned to normal in Hong Kong. There are no mass arrests of dissidents and no shutting down of media. Quite the contrary, people continue to criticize the central and the SAR governments both publicly, in the media, as well as over personal social media. People accused of committing crimes of rioting, unlawful assemblies, and other public order offenses continue to be granted bails or acquitted by the courts. There are no additional restrictions on marches, rallies, or other protests, save those necessarily imposed by reason of COVID-19. In other words, people of Hong Kong continue to enjoy and exercise their rights and freedoms as guaranteed by the Basic Law, just as before. There is a Chinese saying in Hong Kong, and I quote, "Nothing can falsify the truth." It is an undeniable fact that no rhetoric from the West can turn national security and freedoms of the people into competing or conflicting values, nor would it diminish the success of the one country, two systems, whether before or after the passing of the Hong Kong National Security Law. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ronnie. Yes, with a very solid legal background, Mr. Tong explained in details the provisions of the Basic Law and also the National Security Law in Hong Kong as they are. He tried with his academic background address the concerns that the national security law in Hong Kong may go into conflict with the rights and freedoms of people in Hong Kong, or even erode such rights and freedoms. And I think his statement answered the questions. And again, I thank Mr. Tong. Now I would like to invite the Honorable Regina E. Lau Su Yi. Mrs. Yi is currently member of the Legislative Council and chairperson of the New People's Party in Hong Kong. She is also chairperson of the Cervantes Policy Institute. Mrs. Yi joined the Administrative Service of Hong Kong Civil Service in 1975. She is probably best known for her career when she served as Secretary for Security from 1998 to 2003. She was also a member of the Executive Council from 2012 to 2016. And she was also awarded the Golden Bohemia Star in the year 2002. Now the Honorable Regina Yi, please.
Thank you and good morning. Ever since the eruption of protests against the government's proposed rendition of fugitive offenders law in June last year, Western media have been telling an unfair and biased story of suppression of freedoms and autonomy in Hong Kong. Unfair accusations were hurled at the central government for so-called violating the Sino-British Joint Declaration by enacting a national security law for application in Hong Kong. In fact, nothing is further from the truth. There is nothing in the Sino-British Joint Declaration, and I'm holding in my hand a historic copy, my personal copy, kept from 1984, which prevents China from legislating to protect its national security and territorial integrity. Far too many Western politicians and reporters bent on smearing China have based their false claims on the Joint Declaration without being able to provide any factual or legal basis for their accusations. It is doubtful whether these critics have actually paid any attention to the fine print. The Sino-British Joint Declaration is by definition a joint statement by two sovereign powers on the arrangements for Hong Kong after China has resumed the exercise of sovereignty over Hong Kong. The first two articles deal with the question of sovereignty in the form of parallel statements by China and the United Kingdom. Article 1 states from the outset that China has decided to resume the exercise of its sovereignty over Hong Kong. The United Kingdom acknowledged this overarching principle in Article 2. Article 3 spells out upholding national unity and territorial integrity as the overriding objectives of the establishment of the Hong Kong SAR. Against this historical background, it is mind-boggling that harsh criticisms have been leveled against China for taking action to protect the security of Hong Kong and of itself when the SAR was facing existentialist threats. Every country has a right to survive and to protect its safety and territorial integrity, irrespective of the way its government is formed. The importance China attaches to national security is illustrated by Article 23 of the Basic Law, which says that the Hong Kong SAR shall enact laws on its own to prohibit 7 offenses which threaten national security. When Lord Irvine, then Lord Chancellor of the United Kingdom, called on me in the fall of 2002 to discuss the draft national security bill that I was championing as Secretary for Security. He agreed, after looking at the wording of Article 23, that we do have a constitutional responsibility to protect national security. He said to me, it is a question of when and how you do it, not whether or not you do it. Our constitutional obligation is beyond doubt. However, we failed to do so 23 years after reunification. In the absence of laws which prohibit subversion of our political system, separatism, and local terrorist activities, our central government had no choice but to introduce new legislation to protect us. Last year, for months, Hong Kong was tormented by violent protests, arson attacks on government institutions, universities, major transport infrastructure, and quasi-fascist attacks on businesses and individuals linked to China. However, since Beijing announced plans to enact a national security law for Hong Kong, the scale and frequency of violent protests have subsided. Many local residents and businesses have sighed a deep breath of relief that law and order have finally returned, and they can carry on their work and businesses without being harassed or vandalized. There is no truth in allegations that Hong Kong's freedoms have been unduly suppressed. Hong Kong people enjoy a far larger measure of freedom, self-governance, and participatory democracy now than before 1997. On the protection of human rights, Article 39 of Basic Law provides that the two human rights conventions, the ICCPR and the ICESCR, shall remain in force after 1997. It stipulates that the rights and freedoms enjoyed by Hong Kong residents shall not be restricted except by law, and that such restrictions shall not contravene the provisions of these two covenants. Yet it must be borne in mind that the rights and freedoms protected under the ICCPR are not absolute. Article 4 said they can be curtailed in time of public emergency, which threatens the life of the nation. Moreover, Article 19 states that the exercise of the freedom of expression carries with it special duties and responsibilities and may be restricted for respect of the rights or reputation of others, for the protection of national security or public order, order public, or public health or morals. The wording of these provisions reflects the consensus reached by signatory nations on the need to balance the protection of individual rights and freedoms against the importance of safeguarding the security, safety, and collective well-being of the nation. Examples abound of laws enacted by nations around the world to safeguard their safety and security. These laws inevitably have some restrictive impacts on individual rights and freedoms. The existence of such laws provides solid evidence of the necessity for and legitimacy of national security legislation. We in Hong Kong have inherited some of these laws. Regarding the offenses of treason, sedition, espionage, unauthorized disclosure of official information from the British administration. Similar offenses remain on the statute books of the United Kingdom and many Commonwealth countries. The US has a wide panoply of laws to prohibit treason, sedition, subversion, espionage, collusion with foreign countries, and terrorism, just to name a few. Australia had long ago prevented any part of the nation seceding under its constitution. More recently, it has acquired over 80 tough anti-terrorism laws, as well as others covering espionage, subversion, and foreign collusion. The United Kingdom has laws forbidding hate speech. Germany already enacted laws requiring social media networks to remove posts containing law-breaking materials. It is reported to be passing, or has already passed, a new law to require social media networks to report obviously legal or criminal posts to the police. As always, it is a fine line between internet censorship or gagging of free speech and prohibiting downright criminality. Our national security law is fundamentally no different from the national security laws enacted by nations around the world. All four offenses added secession, subversion, terrorist activities, and collusion of foreign or external forces require the elements of mens rea or criminal intent and actus reus, actions manifested by planning, organizing, committing, or participating in specific criminal acts. These are not laws which censor thought or impose undue restrictions on the freedom of expression. Since the national security law has entered into force on 30th June, so far only one person has been charged with inciting secession. In exercise of his rights under the common law system, he applied for habeas corpus, which was rejected by the High Court on the ground that he should have applied for a review of the grounds of bail. His case is pending, and conviction on the secession and terrorism charges against him is far from a foregone conclusion. The rights and freedoms of Hong Kong people are well protected by our judicial system, which enjoys a high reputation. Hong Kong's judicial system is ranked 16th by the World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index 2020, 5 places above that of the United States. As our Chief Justice Geoffrey Ma reiterated in his 2 recent speeches marking the opening of the legal year, the rule of law in Hong Kong is distinguished by the ability of our judges to adjudicate independently, free of political, social, or economic considerations in accordance with their judicial oath. Our judicial system is buttressed by our transparent and open court proceedings and a well-established appellate system. Independent judicial power, including that of final adjudication, is guaranteed by Article 2 of the Basic Law. In recognition of the importance of the rule of law to the success of one country, two systems, the national security law incorporates the twin principles of safeguarding national security and protecting the lawful rights and interests of the people of Hong Kong. The importance of adhering to common law principles, such as presumption of innocence and no retroactivity, are written into the text of the national security law. The enactment of this law is an unprecedented exercise involving the making of a piece of legislation by a civil law jurisdiction for application in a common law jurisdiction. Our central government has manifested great sincerity, flexibility, and seriousness in accommodating Hong Kong's common law system in its effort to safeguard national security. Such efforts should be applauded, and Western nations should cast off their dismissive and negative mindsets in approaching issues relating to this law. Many nations whose representatives are present in this forum have pledged to support Hong Kong under one country, two systems in the run-up to our reunification. We urge you to continue to do so and view the national security law objectively as part and parcel of your support for Hong Kong under one country, two systems.
Just now, Mrs. Yi. In fact, I may add that Mrs. Yi was personally involved in the negotiations between China and the UK, which led to the China-UK Joint Declaration. And also, as the Secretary for Security, she was very much involved in the effort by the Hong Kong SAR government to honor the obligation under Article 23 of the Basic Law of Hong Kong. So, in fact, she also, by comparison, reviewed what other countries which accused China that the Hong Kong national security law in Hong Kong violated the declaration or eroded the basic freedoms of people in Hong Kong. How they did and what they are doing in terms of national security legislation at home. So she, in fact, argued very strongly and impressively that the national security law in Hong Kong SAR is not only legitimate, but also timely. And she also called on other countries to take a very objective approach to the national security law in Hong Kong and continue their valuable support to China. Thank you again. Thank you, Ms. Lee. Finally, I'm going to invite Ms. Nixie Lam for her intervention. As I explained, Ms. Lam is a member of the Youth Development Commission of Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, and she is also a board member of the United Nations Association of China. Now, the floor is yours, Ms. Lam.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, I would like to share some astonishing numbers with you all. Last year in November, 3,900 bottles of gas bomb were found in the Chinese University campus protesting site. In December, 5,588 bottles of gas bomb, unknown chemicals and weapons were found in the Polytechnic University campus protesting site. A total number of 100,000 pieces of bricks were digged out from the pavements around town as weapons and roadblocks. To give you all an idea, the size is equivalent to a total of 48 basketball courts. 52,000 meters of roadside fences were removed from the ground, again act as weapons or roadblock instruments. This year, demonstrators told international media that they were having a peaceful protest on the 1st of January and calling out for the police for killing the fun. But yet, if you Google the word HSBC Lion on Fire, the image of one of our iconic city symbols at fire are heartbreaking by many of us. And how we have come to this is layers and layers of violence covering lies. The differences between the Occupy Central movement is that despite they both have some violence elements in them, there are still some rational Hong Kong people who adhere to the concept of rule of law. But what turned Hong Kong people to an irrational bunch overnight? Is it politicians with ulterior motive? Is it the lies or the idea of secession? At this point, it is still hard for me to believe what I have seen with my own eyes in my own city. Police headquarters were surrounded, legislation complex shattered. What happened to Hong Kong? I remember the day when the first corruption bombs were hurting the police officers. I remember footage of a young female protesters who were burned by the very bomb she threw herself. When police approached and helped her, trying to calm her down and clean up her wound, in return, she screamed and insulted them for it. In the 1st of July 2019, the symbolic independent black flag was hung up outside the Legislative Council complex. The whole of Hong Kong then watches as rioters hammering the glasses facade of the Legislative Council, breaking glasses, shatters everywhere, as young rioters were told, this is the final battle. Fight or there is no tomorrow. They continued to charge the place with sticks and fences for hours, but then when the whole strength opened, these young rioters just stood there and looked at each other as they don't know what to do next and looking all confused. Then they decide to just aimlessly break another glass aside. And that is the moment when I can't help to wonder, do they really know what they were doing? Timeline pushes back to the days when our airport's been attacked. These rioters are not only blocking the operation of the airport, but they decided to tie up a Chinese guy only because he holds a Chinese passport. It's democracy, they say, whereas foreign countries encourage them even more, clouding the belief into thinking that they can do whenever they want, as long as it is for greater cause, lawful or not, harmful or not. On the 21st of July, the national emblem was besmirched. I started to understand this is a way for the oppositions to test out the country's bottom line. Almost simultaneously, foreign media continued to hype up and extravagate the situation, reporting false news, such as Chinese army charging close to the Hong Kong border. CNN even shared a reverse-edited video showing the police throwing gas bombs to the protesters and calling for universal empathy. Is this how they're supposed to show their concern towards Hong Kong? No, this is the way for them to embarrass us, to watch us suffer, pointing fingers and laugh at us for our foolish hatred towards each other. I don't understand what is that made us turn a blind eye towards violence, what made them to spread lies about police. The police officers was using a great amount of time to explain unwarranted charges about police brutality, rape, or even sodomy. Until one day, an officer was attacked right off work. He was stabbed more than 20 times and even severely injured. That kickstarted a series of police-targeted hurting acts. Officers' name, addresses, including where their kids going to school, were exposed one by one online and publicly shared on social media, as if privacy doesn't matter, as if the families of the police officers, children, or elderly doesn't deserve any right. Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, police headquarters has been brutally attacked multiple times? Do you know that pro-establishment politicians' offices were burned down around town? Do you know that the ladies who shared her view at the Human Rights Council in March were sadly targeted up until this very day? Revenge, they say. They all deserve so. If they do not support us, the freedom fighters, then they deserve to be assassinated. Let me raise the questions here. How many of you here know the man who was lit on fire with electric oil only because he has an argument with the rioters over the Chinese nationality? Let me raise the questions where we were a bunch of law-abiding citizens who would wait until the green lights to cross the road, who would queue up patiently to get on transportations. In the blink of an eye, we slowly turn our hearts by tolerating hatred while it's betraying the truth, basing everything on our political views, allowing the lies to control our lives just to win over each another. This is because they told us Hong Kong only has one more chance, one last chance for you to fight. But realistically, does Hong Kong's one last chance lie within the American politicians or within the hands of the old colonial British government? When we watch the younger generation hold up American and British colonial flag, urging them to put pressure on China, asking for independence for Hong Kong, do they even realize what they are doing? I remember there's turmoil in the Middle East. One of my very good friends from Jordan shared his phrase that was given by his uncle living in Egypt. He said, I once thought when I have democracy, everything will be okay. But then clearly, he's so much regretted so. Hong Kong is China's Hong Kong, and our future cannot shine in division and independence. Before all this violence, the Hong Kong that I know of, we will solve problems before asking about political views. We could tease and laugh at each other. Politics would never be the reason for an argument to start. We could talk about anything we want in a cafe, sharing our political opinions without worrying you might be the next target for violence revenge trial, beaten up, paint sprayed on your face, and stripped naked to humiliate you as a human being. Hong Kong at dawn used to be a beautiful metropolitan city full of life. All because of a demonized law, Hong Kong has become gloomy. You must check the rioting schedule every day to understand where in Hong Kong you should avoid going. Businesses will shut down and people are afraid to go out, all because if you don't, you might be the next target. By lynching, human nature has become hideous. As long as rioters think that you are their enemy, you are not sorry for your death or injury. Once the evil within human nature has been lured out, can we even return to how it was? Can Hong Kong still be saved? Until the national security law was put into place, all of a sudden, we saw a glimpse of hope. Finally, we can go out with a peace of mind. Shops will no longer be destroyed or demolished because of their political preferences. Political parties that advocate separatism immediately cleared out their party website and said they do not believe in Hong Kong democracy, Hong Kong independence. Funny enough, the so-called freedom defender who have been pushing for controversial ideology for governing Hong Kong have stood out to say that he regretted that he said that Hong Kong independence is just a romantic thought. And to the Article 23 that they opposed for all these years, turns out they think it is a fine law and they preferred it that way it was. The one thing he failed to mention was that he was the very person to push the extradition bill in the Legislative Council back in 1998, talking about hypocrisy there. In conclusion, we are just ordinary people who truly love Hong Kong. We all want in life are people, families, bounding, community harmony, and social tranquility. And I hope that the homes that our predecessors worked so hard to build can continue to prosper. Hong Kong has always been a West-East cultural coexist situation. It sometimes causes a bit of conflict, but we never relied on hate. We all know hatred can never solve a problem, but only by embracing the beauty and uniqueness of the city. So please, politicians and rioters with the Stand with Hong Kong hat, we all know that freedom is not free, but we are never ready to pay for these violence, hatred, lead consequences that would destroy our 7 million people's home. Let Hong Kong be Hong Kong. And that is, since 1997, the Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nixie. As Ms. Lam said, she's just an average citizen in Hong Kong, and her voice represents the voice of the common people in Hong Kong, the grassroots people in Hong Kong. From her very passionate presentations, we could see how events in Hong Kong gradually developed into alarming violence in which the criminal acts by rioters against ordinary citizens, the police, in the name of democracy and freedoms, turned Hong Kong, a peaceful and dynamic city, into a place of chaos and violence. And I think we also owe Ms. Lam a big thank you for coming to Geneva to share with us the story and the voice of the ordinary citizens in Hong Kong, and also to speak at the Human Rights Council on the NGO podium. Thank you again. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard the presentations of our esteemed panelists. I would like to turn the floor to discussion. I would like to hear your comments and questions. For a technical point of view, please raise up your hands if you have any comments or questions so that I can see who was the first and who will be the next. And also, I would like to explain, as the time is rather limited for our video conference, I would like to give the floor to representatives of missions first, and then give the floor to journalists or other participants. Now, I see the representative from Pakistan, Ambassador, please. Please turn your mute. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Am I audible? Thank you. First of all, let me thank the Permanent Mission of China, Ambassador Chen Shu, Minister Jiang Gong for this event, and a very eminent panel of a very eminent panelist, very comprehensive background of the panelists. I would particularly want to acknowledge a very useful, all presentations were useful, particularly by Honorable Ronnie Tong. He very elaborately and very insightfully commented on the evolution of law and compared the law during the colonial period with the with this particular law. So that was particularly knowledgeable and insightful for me. Yeah, basically, considering the time restriction, I'll just highlight 5 points and would elicit comment of the panelists on these points. First of all, there's your firm belief that each country has a right to safeguard its national security through legislation. And Hong Kong being an inseparable and inalienable part of China, we think that China had all right to enact this legislation. Second point is that we welcome the adoption of this law on strengthening national security in Hong Kong. It reaffirms the firm adherence of one country, two system, and is does not dilute the spirit of one country, two system guideline. Thirdly, that we are quite convinced that this move is conducive to ensure the continuation of one country, two system, and would enable not just Hong Kong, but also the region and beyond region to continue with the long-term prosperity and stability, particularly economic prosperity. Fourth, and I think this is extremely important, and Ambassador Chen Shu also referred to it in his comments, that we believe and we endorse this position that the new law is consistent with the ICCPR and ICSCER. Mr. Ronnie Tong explained Article 4 of the new law. We see consistency in this law with the international conventions, particularly of the ICCPR. And with this, we would bring in that why there's a strong merit in the argument that there is these law provides ample space for China to meet its international human rights obligations through treaty body reporting mechanisms, through its UPR. So that is the way to engage, and that is why we firmly believe that the relevant sides should stop interfering in China's internal affairs by using Hong Kong-related issues and revert to these mechanisms rather than interfering. So with these words, if any panelist would like to come on that, and finally, just to conclude that Ambassador Chen Shu was very right when he mentioned that over 70 countries endorsed a joint statement during the 44th Human Rights Council session. That was a very elaborate, well-drafted joint statement, and Pakistan was happy to be part of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Tai. And now I will give, and also thank you for your contribution, and also I would like to thank you for joining other 70 countries in extending support to China on the Hong Kong question at the session of the Human Rights Council. Now I'd like to give the floor to my colleague from DPR Laos, please, yes. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, Excellencies. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, Excellencies, and thank you very much, moderator, for giving me the floor. First of all, I would like to join the Ambassador of Pakistan in thanking the China mission for organizing this important event. It provides us an opportunity to learn about the real developments in Hong Kong. My thanks also go to the panelists for the informative presentation, and we take note with the appreciation that the law on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong SAR only targeted at the limited category of acts that seriously jeopardize national security. And the most important, the legitimate rights and freedoms of Hong Kong residents can be better exercised in a safe environment. Excellencies and the panelists, as for the issue related to Hong Kong, I wish to share 3 points. This is the national position of the Lao PDR. I think it's quite similar with the point that raised by Ambassador of Pakistan. The first one, Hong Kong is an inseparable part of China, and Hong Kong affairs are China internal affairs. And of course, non-interference is an essential principle enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and a basic norm of the international relations. My second point, in any country, the legislative power on national security issue rests with state. And of course, this is not the human rights issue. So we reaffirm our firm opposition to the practice of politicization of human rights issues. And my third point, we welcome the enactment of the law of the People's Republic of China on safeguarding national security in Hong Kong SAR, which is a legitimate measure that ensures that one country two systems, and that Hong Kong enjoy long-term prosperity and stability. Excellency, Mr. Moderator, and also panelists, I have one question. Maybe some panelists may touch upon this point on the tricky autonomy of Hong Kong. And as I remember, this point is only raised by some certain country in the Human Rights Council. Maybe I think the Mr. Honorable Ronnie Tong, maybe he touched upon this one. So my question is maybe the panelists please further explain whether the law of China on safeguarding national security in Hong Kong SAR affect the high degree of autonomy of Hong Kong SAR. I think this point is very common and it's always raised in the Human Rights Council. So I have really one brief question. So thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to again thank my colleague from the Laos for his intervention and also for the support that Laos extended to China on the question of Hong Kong. Now I would like to give floor to Ronnie Tong to answer the question.
I think it is important to remember that Hong Kong practices the common law system, unlike the rest of China. And under the common law system, judges play a very vital role in not only applying the law, but ensuring that the rights and freedoms of the people of Hong Kong would be safeguarded. The Hong Kong national security law makes it clear that adjudication of offenses under the law would be the responsibility of the Hong Kong judiciary. And that is a very respectful gesture of the autonomy of Hong Kong. So to answer the question from the last speaker, I think the law doesn't affect the autonomy of Hong Kong at all. Rather, it reinforces the autonomy of Hong Kong to practice or apply common law principles to ensure that a proper balance is struck as between the protection of the nation's safety and the protection of individual rights. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And I wonder if other panelists have anything to add to the comment. Yes, Mrs. Yi.
Well, I just want to point out that in the case of the first person charged under the new national security law, in the case of his application for habeas corpus, two learned judges adjudicated on his application, and they said that they would continue to apply common law principles in constructing the national security law. And this is really remarkable, you know, as remarkable as the One Country, Two Systems project itself is, you know, implementing the national security law in a common law jurisdiction. I'm every confidence that our judges will continue to be able to do that.
Thank you very much. I hope that they have answered your questions. Thank you. I saw participants from other missions, including from EU members and also European members. I wonder if you have any questions to the panelists. If you do, please raise your hands. Otherwise, I may give the floor to the media first, but any comments and questions from other participants are also welcome. I saw a journalist from Reuters, Stephanie. I hope we can hear you.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for taking my question. Stephanie Nabehe, Reuters. I wondered if you could, perhaps Mr. Xi could bring us up to date on the case of the 12 Hong Kong people arrested by China at sea in August. Their relatives earlier this week expressed concern about their access to lawyers, which they would like to appoint. And they are, of course, been charged related to alleged crimes in Hong Kong. I wonder if you could bring us up to date on their status, their access to lawyers, and what the whether guarantees of presumption of innocence are being provided. Can you just bring us up to date on their status and what the time frame is for their adjudicating their case, please? Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. 徐司长，刚才您听得到了吗？徐司长。
Director General Xi, did you hear the question?
那么现在请这个徐司长回答，谢谢。
The journalist from Reuters asked a question, and in fact, this question is not directly related to the national security law, and it is not related to the theme of today's meeting. But hereby, I guess I can elaborate on certain points. The Public Security Authority on the mainland China follows very strictly the criminal procedure law in China. So first of all, following the provisions of the criminal procedure law, once the law is violated, relevant law enforcement agencies will follow this law to investigate in the case. And they are entitled to investigate the case. After investigation, following the provisions of the criminal procedure law, they can prosecute and decide whether the case will be prosecuted. Of course, we are an administrative body and we do not interfere in the work of the Public Security Authority. For specific reasons, I cannot provide very specific information, but what I can say is that all procedures are strictly following the law. And you ask about the arrested personnel, whether their rights can be guaranteed. The law in China explicitly stipulates that certain procedures will be taken and the suspects can access lawyers, and the criminal procedure rights can be fully protected in accordance with law. As for presumption of innocence, it is also one of the principles in our criminal procedure law. So currently, though I do not see that these people are alleged by the national security law. And Article 55 also specifies that in 3 specific circumstances, relevant national judicial bodies and the Supreme People's Court or courts designated by the Supreme People's Court will carry out their duties. And I do not see that they are alleged on the basis of the national security law. In any event, I believe that the law enforcement bodies and the judicial bodies in the mainland of China will strictly follow the criminal procedure law and the relevant regulations and have a fair trial on the case and fairly deal with these cases. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Xi. Does that answer your questions? Then now I will give the floor to another journalist. I see Ms. Zhang Jinghao from Radio International. Ms. Zhang, please.
Thank you very much. I wish to ask that up to now, the national security law for Hong Kong, has it brought positive effects on national security in Hong Kong, and what are the effects? Thank you.
I see Ms. Lam. Can you answer her questions? Ms. Lam, please.
Because she raised the question in Chinese, I will also answer the question in Chinese.
Go ahead, please.
Is my camera off? Since she asked the question in Chinese, I'll answer it in Chinese. From the perspective of a Hong Kong citizen, in my speech, I also mentioned that, in fact, before the adoption of the law, our life was very unstable. I mentioned that every day in different districts of Hong Kong, there are some files telling you where they're going to carry out terrorist activities in certain districts. They're going to attack those who do not agree with their ideas. And for example, if they know that one person does not agree with their ideas, they're going to look for that person's personal information and track down that person. We also had a consultation organized by the CE, including consultation on ideas about the fugitive offenders ordinance. One lady said that the law is fine, so on and so forth. Several days after that, her information was tracked down, and when she finished her work, she was attacked. Those people, they are going to attack anyone who do not agree with their ideas. In my case, I am a very vocal person. I tell them that I do not agree with your violent activities, and they told me that we are going to kill you and your family. They know my information, my ID card number, the information of my whole family members. I'm not the only one. Anyone who disagrees with their ideas will face such risks. So our life was in chaos before the national security law. And we can't believe that such a modern, such a positive and dynamic city as Hong Kong can turn into such a situation overnight. Why people accept violence? So many people on the 1st of October, the National Day, they started protesting those rioters. They started singing the national anthem, and those people were painted, sprayed paint, black paint by the rioters, and they were attacked. So they used terrorist methods and means to stop anyone from disagreeing with them. If they are protecting democracy, if they are guaranteeing democracy for every person, I do not think that is the case. They're using violent means to suppress normal, common citizens. After the national security law, things have changed. Now restaurants and some businesses and even a group that spoke at the UN. After their speech at the UN, all their shops were vandalized, the glasses broken. After the national security law, such things stop happening. And we do not see violent activities or tracking down personal information. Things like this stop happening and occurring in Hong Kong. So I think the stability brought about by the national security law really made a difference in our lives.
Thank you very much. I do not see any more journalists raising up his or hands. We still have a few minutes. Can I also invite now the panelists to wind up your presentations, probably 1 or 2 minutes for each of you. Ms. Xi, 你们总结一下这个您讲的这个和自己的感受。
哦，好，我想呢，因为刚才啊，这个
Just now, other panelists, in their speech, they mentioned the joint declaration. I want to add several points about the joint declaration. The joint declaration composes of 3 parts. The first section is about the regain of Hong Kong to China. which was also mentioned by Ms. Yip, which mentions that in 1997, China restores its governance over Hong Kong and it is returned from Britain to China. And second, it stipulates arrangements for transition, including Annex 2 and Annex 3. These are all elaborating administrative governance and also the establishment of the liaison group and other related matters during the transition period. So part 1 and part 2 are actually about the obligations and duties of the British government, but these two parts, as the transitional work has been completed, these duties and obligations have also been completed. Therefore, Britain has already completed all its obligations under the joint declaration. And the third part is about China's policies, including Article 3 and Annex 1. These are providing China's policies about governance over Hong Kong. And these are China's internal affairs. And these are policies announced by China, and these are not in any case between China and Britain. These are for the long-term prosperity of Hong Kong, but these are not commitments or obligations to the British government. During the negotiation between China and the UK, it was clearly stated that China has a one country, two system principle of Hong Kong, and this falls within China's internal affairs. And these policies by China cannot be explained as an agreement approved by a foreign government, which means that the UK does not have any rights or obligations over this. Therefore, there's nothing related to implementation or supervision. And by the principle of, and by the international norms of non-interference in internal affairs, the UK or any other countries are not entitled to interfere in China's governance or China's affairs over Hong Kong. And in the joint declaration, China has announced our policies over Hong Kong, and these have been fully endorsed by the Basic Law of Hong Kong and fully implemented. Another point is that China adopted the Basic Law for Hong Kong, and this is based upon the Constitution of China, rather based upon the joint declaration and based on Article 31 of Constitution. When necessary, the country can establish a special administrative region, and the rules governing the SAR will be decided by the NPC. And the NPC can decide the structures and the principles of the SAR. So these two articles provide a constitutional foundation for our principles and policies over Hong Kong. And Article 12 has also been established before 1983, before the joint declaration. Therefore, we believe that the Constitution is the foundation of the Basic Law and the relevant policies, and the Chinese government exercises its administration over Hong Kong on the basis of our own constitution. Therefore, it is not related to the joint declaration, and it cannot be used as an excuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Xi, for your elaboration. Now I would like to turn to Ronnie, Mr. Tong.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank the organizers for organizing this forum today. In particular, it gives people from Hong Kong a chance to tell the international community how Hong Kong people look at this situation and look at this particular issue. I'm a lawyer by training, and in particular, I feel very deeply that following the reaction internationally in relation to the Hong Kong national security law, I want to hear real arguments based on facts and accepted principles. But from day one, all I hear are accusations and political rhetoric without much reference to the basic facts or the relevant principles that as a lawyer, I'd be very interested in hearing. So I would like to say that I hope in future there would be more international forums like this to enable people to tell the international community, in fact, what are the opposing arguments in this debate? And why is it that China and Hong Kong is being accused of, for example, violating the Joint Declaration, and that the rights of people in Hong Kong has somehow been eroded in some way without specifying what and by what reason? So thank you very much, and I enjoy this forum very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Tong. Can I give the floor to Mrs. Ip, Regina?
Yes, as someone who took part in the Sino-British negotiations in the 1980s as a backbench expert, but part of the British team at that time, I can vouch for the fact that the British negotiators fully understood that China would resume exercise of its sovereignty over Hong Kong. We are an inalienable part of China. No amount of sanctions or condemnations could alter that fact, and China has every right to enact legislation to protect our safety as well as the safety of the nation. Yeah. So it is truly astounding that nowadays British ministers like Dominic Raab has turned around to invoke the Joint Declaration to slam Hong Kong, one country, two systems, and our motherland. Unfortunately, the international media has not been helping us very much to tell the true story about Hong Kong. So again, like my colleague Ronnie, I wish to thank the Geneva Mission for organizing this conference. I hope the international community would be willing to look at the facts and realities in a more objective manner and give us a fair chance to voice our story and to give a more judicious assessment of the situation in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ip. Now the floor is yours, Ms. Lam.
Thank you. I think as a Northern Hong Kong people, it is really sad for me to look at what has been happening in Hong Kong. We used to be really abiding the law and we respect everyone, but things has changed, and it's been going through a way that nobody knows what to do anymore. And what is really sad is that we can clearly see international politicians were trying to use Hong Kong as their election chips, like bargaining chips. They're using Hong Kong every time when there is election of mayor or presidential. They come out to say, hey, we stand with Hong Kong and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. Please, I mean, this is the home of 7 million people that's living in Hong Kong. This is not some kind of game for you to use whenever you want. So I think it's just important that we face the truth and look at what is exactly has been happening in Hong Kong and just put it fairly. I feel, I think me and a lot of people living in Hong Kong were very sad at what's been, the truth being banned around and a lot of lies are going on. I think this has to be stopped, and I hope, as other guests were saying, we can have more platforms like this and we can invite more Hong Kong people to talk about their real experience and such. I know a lot of international media didn't share enough information or holistic information of what Hong Kong has been going through. And I think it's important, and I think it might be a good time to fill that gap in other opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I would like to thank our 4 panelists who share with us from their perspectives how they see the situation in Hong Kong, what is the truth and facts in Hong Kong, and what is the substance of this Hong Kong national security law, and why the charges or accusations that it violates or breaches the Joint Declaration or the compromise the human rights in Hong Kong are not tenable. In fact, the Permanent Mission of China is honored to host this virtual event conference, only because from the media here or elsewhere, we have heard and we have seen so much disinformation, distortion of facts, and also distraction from serious and professional discussion. I hope, as Tony said, we hope to have a more substantive discussion rather than political rhetorics. And also, I hope this will be a start for us to share with people from Beijing and from Hong Kong what we're doing here in the Human Rights Council and in what way we can contribute jointly to the promotion and protection of human rights, not only in Hong Kong, but elsewhere in the world. Again, I would like to thank you, and also I would like to thank the interpreters, without whose valuable assistance we will find much more difficult to communicate with each other. I would like to thank my colleagues from missions and also from the media, and I hope to see you again in the future. Of course, I would like to thank first of all, the ambassador to address and to communicate with our audience. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. Thank you. Team.